What if everything you were taught about God was a lie? What if the story of creation was actually a carefully woven veil to hide the most disturbing truth of all? Something so impactful, so forbidden, that the church itself buried it for centuries. This secret not only challenges everything you believe about the divine, but exposes the greatest spiritual conspiracy ever devised. And today you will know the truth. From the very beginning we were taught that God is love, that we are His children, that this world is a test, a path of learning. But what if, in reality, we were trapped here against our will? What if this existence was a prison and God, the warden? In an ancient text, banned and forgotten in the shadows of time, lies the revelation that changes everything. It exposes a God who did not create humans out of love, but to imprison them in an endless cycle of pain and forgetfulness. A God who does not want you to discover who you really are. Before the creation of the world, even before the first spark of light, there was only an infinite essence, pure and radiant. The true God was not a being sitting on a throne judging souls, but an eternal energy, an ocean of absolute consciousness. But something happened, something that was never meant to happen. A fragment of this light distorted itself, separated from its source, and created something imperfect. This being, arrogant and hungry for control, declared itself the only God, and to hide its own limitation, forged an imprisoning reality. And thus, this world was born, not as a celestial garden, but as a labyrinth of forgetfulness. The hidden texts say that Jesus did not come to save us from sin, but to reveal this forbidden secret. He tried to show us that we do not belong here, that we were deceived. But this truth was too dangerous for those who wished to maintain control. So, they did what they always do to those who challenged the imposed order. They silenced his voice, distorted his message, and turned his story into yet another piece of the grand illusion. But here is the key to your liberation. If this world was built as a prison, then there is also a way out. And it all begins when you awaken to the truth. When you realize that you are not a mere mortal, a sinner trying to earn a promised paradise. You are a spark of the divine, an immortal consciousness that has been deceived and now has the chance to remember. But the question that truly matters is, are you ready to see beyond the veil? In the beginning, before time, before form, there was only pure, boundless light. Not a deity as we have been taught, not a figure seated on a throne casting judgment, but an infinite source of energy, consciousness, and harmony. This was what the Gnostics called the One, the true eternal force that existed beyond duality, beyond conflict. But perfection does not simply remain static. It emanates, it expands, and from this divine radiance came forth the eons, beings, of pure light, aspects of the source itself. They were not angels, not servants, but manifestations of divinity, infinitely more powerful than any god later worshipped. Together they wove the eternal fabric of existence, each in balance, each in unity. But where there is light, the shadow is never far behind. Among these divine emanations was Sophia, wisdom incarnate, a force of creation unparalleled. But Sophia was different. She did not wish to create in harmony with another. She wanted to act alone, to bring forth something entirely new. And this single act of imbalance set into motion the greatest catastrophe the cosmos had ever seen. What she created was not another being of light, not an expression of divine perfection. It was a distortion, a shadow, a chaotic anomaly that could not integrate into the eternal harmony of the source. It was a rupture in the great order of existence, a force of raw, untamed darkness that should never have been. And yet, this shadow did not remain passive. It stirred, it grew, it hungered. From this abyss was born something else, something that would forever alter the fate of the cosmos, a being of arrogance, ignorance, and boundless pride. The Gnostics called him Yaldabaoth. His form was monstrous, a dragon's body, a lion's head and eyes that burned like lightning. But more terrifying than his appearance was his mind, for he was blind to the higher realms, cut off from the truth. In his isolation, he gazed upon the void, saw nothing beyond himself, and declared, "I am God and there is no other." Does that sound familiar? It should. These are the very words echoed throughout the Bible, the proclamation of a jealous and vengeful God who demands submission. But what if this so-called God was never divine at all? What if he was nothing more than a cosmic mistake? A being born of imbalance, lost in his own delusion? The Gnostics saw Yaldabaoth not as a savior, but as the architect of a prison, a false creator who fashioned the material world to entrap souls, to keep them blind to their true nature. And here is where the greatest deception of all time begins. Because once you declare yourself the only God, you must ensure that no one ever discovers the truth. Yaldabaoth did not rule alone. From his essence, he created the Archons, his enforcers, his jailers. They were the forces of control, of deception, the architects of the system that keeps humanity asleep. They built a world designed not to enlighten, but to obscure. A world where suffering, fear, and ignorance became the foundation of existence. And so the grand illusion was set in motion. But here's the question that changes everything. If this world was built as a prison, then what does that mean for you? Because if you are here trapped in the cycle of life and death, it is not because you are meant to be. It is because something or someone does not want you to remember what you truly are. Every one of us is a fragment of the eternal light. So for one being to declare, "I am the only God, worship me," is essentially the greatest sin possible, as it denies the divinity of everything else. On the Origin of the World states, "And when he said this, he sinned against all the immortal beings." In other words, congratulations, you have just committed the first blasphemy. So, what does Yaldabaoth do with his newfound delusion of grandeur? He decides to create. He takes the formless chaos around him, matter without spirit, and shapes it into heaven and earth. But this is not some grand, benevolent act of creation like the Bible describes. This is a being trying to construct a throne for itself. Yet Yaldabaoth does not stop at creating heaven. He decides to make offspring. Because, of course, every self-proclaimed god needs minions and henchmen, right? And, so get this, he names them by the sounds they make as they are born. When one of them utters Yao, Yaldabaoth declares, "Great, your name is Yao." His second son says, "Eh," and he is named Eloi. The third makes a sound like ass, and naturally he is named Astaphios. I mean, you really cannot make this up. Now there was another son named Sabaoth, and he is extremely important. We will come back to him in a moment. Altogether, these beings of darkness form what are known as the 7 Archons, and they are not exactly the Justice League. Archon literally means ruler, and they are described as androgynous, embodying both masculine and feminine traits. Now this is a theme you will see often in Gnosticism, the unification of opposites. But do not be fooled into thinking these are balanced, enlightened beings. No, these are the architects, the rulers of chaos. While these beings are inherently chaotic and destructive, they are also modeled after the divine pattern from the higher realms. It is as if someone took a perfect blueprint and created a distorted, glitchy version. They are powerful, sure, but they are not divine. On the Origin of the World flips everything on its head. Heaven and earth are not divine creations, but malformed prisons made by a delusional being. Even Yaldabaoth, the supposed god, is revealed to be blind, arrogant, and completely unaware of the higher realms of light. No wonder the Church did not want this narrative circulating. These beings were not enlightened or balanced. They were the architects of chaos. Though modeled after the divine blueprint of higher realms, they were distorted echoes, powerful yet devoid of true divinity. On the Origin of the World flips everything upside down. Heaven and earth are not divine creations, but malformed prisons, and angels are not celestial guides, but archons, rulers of disorder. Even Yaldabaoth, this so-called god, is blind, arrogant, and utterly ignorant of the realms of light. No wonder the Church wanted this narrative buried, but the Gnostics weren't just spinning wild stories for entertainment. These myths were metaphors for the human condition and our struggle to remember who we truly are. As we peel back the layers, you'll see that this story holds a profound secret, one that reveals something fundamental about you. And what is that secret? We'll get there. But first, what if the real war in heaven wasn't about Lucifer's prideful rebellion? What if it was something else entirely? Let's talk about Sabaoth, He's an interesting figure, the son of Yaldabaoth. After creating his chaotic self-proclaimed kingdom, Yaldabaoth surrounds himself with servile Archons and basks in their worship. He declares, "I am God, and there is no other." But then something unexpected happens. Sophia hears him, and she is furious. The text describes her anger as righteous indignation. She calls him Samael, the blind god, a name that cuts through his delusions. But guess who else hears her? Sabaoth. And for the first time, someone within Yaldabaoth's realm wakes up. It's like realizing you've been trapped in a cult. Sabaoth sees through the illusion and turns to Sophia in praise. In response, she grants him a portion of the light of the higher realms. And in that moment, he is transformed. He becomes luminous, aware, and empowered. The text says he is now called Lord of Hosts, a title with profound implications. This is an act of cosmic mutiny, and it ignites a war in the heavens. If this sounds like the story of Lucifer's rebellion, it should. But in this version, the fallen figure is not the villain, he's the hero. Sabaoth isn't a power-hungry traitor trying to overthrow God. He's the son who finally realizes his father is a delusional tyrant, and he refuses to play along. Then, an unexpected turn. Sophia introduces Sabaoth to her daughter, Zoe, whose name means life, and Sabaoth falls hard. Together they form a cosmic power couple. Zoe teaches him about the higher realms, and with his newfound wisdom, Sabaoth creates a magnificent dwelling, far surpassing anything Yaldabaoth had ever built. This is the ultimate moving out of your toxic dad's basement story. And Yaldabaoth? He's livid. His own son, whom he thought he controlled, has aligned with Sophia and Zoe and now rules over a realm beyond his reach. But Yaldabaoth isn't done. He has one final move to make. He creates death. Do you see the balance? Sabaoth leaves with life, so Yaldabaoth, in retaliation, brings death into existence. It's a cruel, petty act, but thematically, it's beautiful. Death, in the Gnostic texts, is an androgynous force. It doesn't just exist, it reproduces. Mixing with its own nature, it spawns 7 offspring, each embodying the forces that enslave humanity. The male offspring, envy, wrath, weeping, sighing, mourning, lamenting, and groaning. The female offspring, lust, grief, bitterness, cursing. Sighing, again, apparently we need extra sighing, and quarrelsomeness. These are the forces that bind us, the spiritual chains that keep humanity trapped. But here's the twist. Gnosticism teaches that death is not the end. It's just another layer of the illusion. Yaldabaoth, for all his arrogance, has always feared one thing, that something greater than him exists. Deep down, he suspects the truth, and that fear drives him to issue a challenge. If anything existed before me, let it appear so that I may see its light. And immediately, his worst fear is realized. A piercing light descends from the 8th heaven, cutting through the fabric of reality. And within this light appears a human form, a being so radiant that Yaldabaoth is shaken to his core. This is not just any human. This is Adam of light. And let's get one thing straight. When I say Adam, I don't mean some guy made of dirt wandering around with a fig leaf. No, the original Adam was not flesh, but pure light. A luminous, immortal being, the perfect prototype of humanity, before everything fell apart. In the beginning there was chaos, an infinite stretch of darkness, a void devoid of form and light. But from this chaos, an astonishing being arose, Adam, the Eye of Light. While the ruler of the Chaos realm, Yaldabaoth, busied himself with crafting a world that felt more like a disordered mess, Adam was quietly building something far grander. He fashioned not just one, but an entire eternal realm, vast beyond imagination, a space so beautiful that it outshone anything Yaldabaoth had created. And just to make sure there would be no confusion about who truly had mastery over creation, Adam added 6 more realms within the first, each one 7 times more magnificent than the last. Imagine that, an eternal domain, layered with worlds more exquisite than anything a ruler of chaos could muster. Yaldabaoth, in his self-proclaimed godhood, was furious. His claims of omnipotence were now the subject of mockery, even among his own loyal followers. The Archons, who once bowed to him, now laughed in his face. The Archons looked at Adam and saw a god, not a mere being of light. They laughed at Yaldabaoth's arrogance, acknowledging that the human Adam had outdone them all. In that moment, the veil of Yaldabaoth's self-declared supremacy began to crumble. Struggling to maintain any shred of his former authority, Yaldabaoth devised a new plan. If he couldn't erase Adam, he would contain him. So he commanded the Archons to create a man from the earth, an obedient servant to carry out the chaotic design. Yet, as the Archons tried to mimic the brilliance of Adam, they failed spectacularly. They were beings of death and destruction, not of creation, and their imitation was nothing more than a lifeless, soulless shell, a puppet without a soul. For 40 days this creation lay abandoned, a motionless husk. But then Sophia, the embodiment of divine wisdom, intervened. She had a plan. Before the Archons could make Adam's physical form, Sophia had already sent a drop of her own divine light into the world, creating a being of pure life. This being was Eve, a goddess of light, Sophia's daughter, but in the form of a human. In her light met matter, and she breathed life into Adam. When Adam awoke, his eyes opened, and he beheld Eve, the one who had given him life. "You shall be called the mother of the living," he declared, recognizing her as the source of his existence. But as he spoke, something profound occurred. The divine spark that had been trapped within the material realm began to awaken. The light, of their true nature imprisoned in flesh, was now on the verge of realizing its potential. But Yaldabaoth, unable to contain his growing fear, did what all tyrants do. He attempted to defile what he couldn't control. He and the Archons sought to defile Eve, believing that by contaminating her with darkness, they could prevent her return to the realms of light. They even tried to deceive Adam, making him believe that Eve had come from his rib, a subtle ploy to force submission and maintain control. Yet Eve, the true embodiment of wisdom and strength, laughed at their pathetic plan. She blinded the Archons with a flash of her divine power and left behind a lower version of herself with Adam. Then she entered the Tree of Knowledge, revealing herself as the very essence of enlightenment. The Archons, who had believed they were in control, fled in terror. But despite their attempts to manipulate and control, the spark within Adam and Eve could not be extinguished. The Archons now faced an undeniable truth. Humanity, their creation, was not so easily subdued. Adam and Eve were not the passive, obedient beings they had hoped for. They were more. They were reminders of something ancient, something divine, something that could not be trapped in the cages of flesh and suffering. And so the battle lines were drawn. Yaldabaoth and his minions, desperate to keep humanity in the dark, would stop at nothing to maintain their grip on the material world. But Adam, the Eye of Light, and Eve, the Mother of Life, were the harbingers of a new dawn, one that would one day awaken humanity to its true potential, a potential that had been hidden beneath the weight of ages, waiting for the moment when the light would break free and shine through the darkness. This, then, is the story of creation, not as it was written by the rulers of chaos, but as it was meant to be, a story of divine light, trapped in flesh, struggling to remember its true origin. The struggle is far from over, but the spark of divinity is eternal, and it will one day rise again, shattering the chains that bind it to the material world. In the beginning, the world was not as it seemed. The skies stretched endlessly above. The earth beneath trembled with ancient power, and yet a great secret was hidden from the eyes of those who roamed it. The first humans, Adam and Eve, were born not into a world of paradise, but one of manipulation, a carefully crafted illusion where the true nature of existence was veiled. At the heart of this illusion was a divine deception, one that sought to keep humanity in the dark. The rulers, the Archons, had created a world bound by fear and ignorance, a world where the light of true knowledge was kept hidden from the very beings they created. They told Adam and Eve to obey, to stay away from the Tree of Knowledge, warning them that to eat from it would mean their doom. But what if this was not a warning, but a carefully veiled lie designed to keep them ignorant? Enter the serpent, a being often misunderstood, portrayed as the villain. But what if it was not the serpent, but the very force of liberation itself? What if the serpent was not here to deceive, but to awaken? This being was more than just a creature slithering through the garden. It was a manifestation of wisdom, of Sophia herself, the divine spark that existed within the very fabric of the universe. She came not to destroy but to free. The moment Eve, the earthly representation of humanity's potential, encountered the serpent, everything changed. The serpent whispered the truth. You will not die. Your minds will be opened. You will see beyond the veil and you will know yourselves as divine. With these words, a powerful shift occurred. Eve's eyes were opened to the true nature of the world. She saw the lies woven into the fabric of existence and realized that the so-called divine rulers were not gods at all, but mere pretenders, afraid of the power that humanity held within. She ate the fruit, not as an act of disobedience, but as an act of defiance, an act of liberation, and with that Eve's eyes and Adam's were opened. They saw the world for what it truly was, not a paradise, but a prison. Their nakedness was not physical, it was an awakening to the truth, a realization that they had been deceived. They saw through the illusion of the Archons, and in that moment they understood the nature of their existence. They were divine, powerful, and free. But the Archons could not allow this. They could not tolerate such knowledge, and so they cast Adam and Eve out of paradise, using the age-old threat of punishment and damnation to try to suppress their newfound power. They sent fiery angels to guard the tree of life, but even in their exile, Adam and Eve carried within them the divine spark that no ruler, no Archon, could extinguish. What the Archons failed to understand, however, was that they were no longer the rulers of the world. The true force of creation, the divine spark of Sophia, had already begun to spread. Adam and Eve, though exiled, were not defeated. They had awakened to the truth, and nothing could stop them now. The real battle was just beginning, a battle that would reach its peak with the arrival of a new force in the world, the Christ. But this was no ordinary Christ. This was the Gnostic Christ, a disruptor, a revolutionary who came not to save humanity in the way the Archons had intended, but to awaken humanity to its true divine nature. This Christ came not as a savior to be worshipped, but as a teacher, a guide to help humanity remember what they had always been, divine beings, full of power and light. His message was clear. The old world, built on fear and control, had to fall. The knowledge of the divine within, each of us would shatter the chains that had been placed upon our minds. As the battle between light and dark raged on, it became clear that the true nature of the world was not to be found in the physical, in the material realm controlled by the Archons. The true world, the real paradise, was the one that existed within, a paradise that could never be taken away, no matter how hard the Archons tried to suppress it, and so humanity's journey continued. The knowledge of the divine spark that burned in each soul began to spread, awakening others to their true power. The old world crumbled, but the new world, one built on truth, on freedom, and on the remembrance of our divinity, began to rise. This is not just a story of Adam and Eve. This is the story of every soul, of every person who has ever been told they are small, powerless, or unworthy. This is the story of the Great Awakening, an awakening that will continue until every soul knows its true nature, its divine essence. It is the story of liberation, and it is only just beginning. Sitting here, imagining that there was a lion-faced God throwing a tantrum like a CEO of heaven, or that Adam, the man of light, built a 7 times better universe like a cosmic celebrity, or that Eve was walking around as both a woman and a talking serpent at the same time. Well, no, not exactly. But before you breathe a sigh of relief, let me hit you with something even more shocking. All of this is happening inside you. Here's the point: the ancients weren't foolish. They weren't sitting around creating stories about lion gods and forbidden fruit just for fun. They were trying to explain something huge, something that people still haven't fully figured out today. These stories aren't about history. They're about you. They're about what's happening inside you right now, every single day. Gnosticism was never just about gods and cosmic drama. It was about the mind, about the struggle between ignorance and awareness, about waking up to who you really are. So, let's break this down. Yaldabaoth, the blind and arrogant ruler who claims to be the true god, is your ego. The voice in your head that says, "I'm in control, I know everything I need to know, I'm the center of the universe." The ego is blind. It thinks it's the source of everything, that nothing existed before it. But deep down it's terrified that something greater exists outside of it, something it can't control, something that isn't the highest power. And what does the ego do when it's scared? It lies. It creates illusions. It builds entire systems to keep you distracted so you don't realize the truth about yourself. Now, Adam, the man of light, is the blueprint of what you could become. In other words, it's your higher self. This isn't about some floating, glowing guy in the eighth heaven. It's the part of you that knows better. The part of you that sees beyond the illusions, that knows you're more than your thoughts, fears, and insecurities. It's what you could become. But here's the problem. Your ego, Yaldabaoth, doesn't want you to realize that this higher self exists. Because if you do, it's game over. You stop living in fear. You stop believing the lies. You wake up. And what does the ego do? It creates a fake version of you, a shell, a programmed identity, a personality shaped by external forces. This is the earthly Adam, the version of you stuck in the system, believing whatever the world tells you to believe, the one who forgets who they really are. Now, the most interesting part, the most misunderstood character in this whole story is Eve. Because Eve isn't just a person here. Eve is a process. Eve is intuition, inner wisdom. That little voice in your head that says, "Hey, something's not right here." She's the moment when you start questioning everything. And when the Archons, your fears, doubts, and programmed beliefs, then say, "Don't eat from that tree, don't ask questions, don't seek knowledge, just obey," what does Eve do? She calls BS. Adam and Eve end up eating from the tree of knowledge. And they wake up. The illusion shatters, and suddenly you see the world and yourself as they truly are. Now let's talk about the biggest scam in history, the fall of man. Because if you really think about it, Adam and Eve didn't fall. They rose, they gained knowledge, they saw through the lies, they realized their own power. And how does the system react when someone breaks free? Panic, earthquakes, curses, divine threats. The Archons freak out and do what every controlling power structure does when it loses control. And that sounds very familiar, doesn't it? What happens today when people break out of any system of control? So, with all this in mind, what does the end of the world in our story mean? In the origin of the world, it says that the Archons' days are numbered. When humanity starts to wake up, the text describes their downfall, their heavens collapsing, their forces being consumed by fire, and the entire realm of darkness being obliterated. It says their heavens will fall one by one, and their forces will be consumed by fire. Their eternal realms will also be overturned, and their heaven will fall and break into two. Then it describes how the light within us will triumph and return to its source. The glory of the light will fill everything. Humanity, finally free from the ruler's influence, will enter the kingless realm. But what does the kingless realm mean? Remember, this whole story isn't about something that literally happened in the past or an actual physical event in the future. It's about something that's happening all the time inside of you. The ego, Yaldabaoth, wants to keep you asleep, trapped in illusion. It wants you to stay busy, distracted, afraid, not questioning anything. The higher self, Adam of Light, is the part of you that knows that something out there is greater. It's waiting for you to recognize it. It's your higher self. And Eve, the instructor, is that spark, that voice urging you to question, to seek, to awaken. So what's the kingless realm? It's a state of consciousness where we have mastered ourselves. It's a place with no rulers because we rule ourselves, the kingless realm. Now, here's the most important part to remember about all of this. Every time you choose fear over questioning, you obey the Archons. You let them rule you. Every time you choose comfort over truth, you stay trapped in their system. But every time you choose to ask, to seek, to wake up, you eat the fruit, and that's the real secret. The Garden of Eden isn't a place in the past. It's in your mind. and you're still standing before that tree every single day with a choice, eat or obey. And believe me, there's much more to this story. If you want to know the real reason why God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, watch my next video. Now we come to the point of transformation, the moment when the journey doesn't end but expands within you. Perhaps what has been said here will still echo in your mind in the coming days, weeks, or even years. For the true revelation lies not in the information, but in the silent change it triggers within each of us. The story of Adam and Eve, of Yaldabaoth and the Full, is a powerful metaphor, an invitation to look within and ask, who are we really, if not our fears, our limiting beliefs, and the echoes of a past that no longer serves our future? When we free ourselves from the chains imposed by our own minds, we begin to realize that the true fall is not a decline, but an ascent to awareness. Every time we choose questioning over passive acceptance, awakening happens. It is this daily choice, this constant challenge between the comfort of illusion and the clarity of truth that shapes our journey. It's not about fleeing from fears or difficulties, but about confronting them with courage, with the certainty that within us exists a power capable of transcending any limit imposed by the ego. The greatest power of all is not in control or obedience, but in the ability to choose to look beyond appearances, to question what we've been taught, and to make space for what truly resonates with our essence. This is the true forbidden fruit, the freedom to be who we really are, free from the chains of the false identity built by fear. And when we choose this path, our vision expands and we begin to see that the true Garden of Eden is here, within us, ready to be explored, free from false narratives and illusions. We can no longer hide behind the curtains of ignorance. The world around us is changing, and we, as an integral part of it, must transform as well. The system is no longer our master, and the archetypes that once controlled us are now disintegrating as we choose the light within our consciousness. It is in this awakening process that we find the true meaning of life, in the pursuit of truth, the courage to question, and the freedom to be authentic. And while society tries to dictate our limits, it is our responsibility to cross the boundaries imposed on us and discover what it truly means to live fully. So I ask you now, having traveled this path, what is your choice? Will you continue following the flow of ignorance, letting fear dictate your decisions? Or will you lift your head, look to the horizon, and choose truth, freedom, the light that has always been within your reach? The fruit is before you, and the only thing that separates you from your true potential is the courage to take the first bite. If this content has touched something deep inside you, share this journey. Like, comment, and subscribe, because awakening begins when we connect with each other and support one another in this search. Together we are stronger, more conscious, freer. The future lies ahead, and it begins the moment we choose to awaken.